Well, good evening.
Good evening.
Great event. Great crowd, terrific music. I'm going to speak tonight not about the Lighthouse, not even for the Lighthouse, but I'm going to speak as the Lighthouse, as in the first person. So let's get started. Hi, I'm Presqu'ile Point Lighthouse. How are you doing?
Hi, fine. How are you?
Well, I'm fine. As a matter of fact, I'm really fine because I'm getting a makeover.
Oh.
Well, let's go back to the beginning. You know, I was built in 1840. That's 178 years ago. Well, so I'm old. What of it? Well, I was really lucky because the civil engineer that built me, that designed me, Unic Olberry, he didn't want to build just any another tall barn. He wanted something that was very distinctive, something that didn't look like the rest of the lighthouses. So I was designed with style and a little bit of flair. You know, there were angles and curves and the arched windows. And my limestone coat was really spiffy. So I was happy to stand out there at the end of Presqu'ile Point and represent the community of Brighton. And it wasn't all sweetness and light. I mean, it got really busy. The traffic into the bay really got heavy over the years. And the lighthouse keepers were constantly busy trying to keep my light going at night and in the bad weather and, you know, during that terrible fog. The first light keeper was Mr. Sweatman, and they built him a cottage just a few yards away. And all the lighthouse keepers would live there over the years. Now, the lighthouse keepers, they were anxious to keep the travelers safe, passengers and sailors that went into the bay on the ships. But they were also looking after my well-being too, especially in the worst of the weather. Well, I was really happy to be able to keep sailors out on the lake safe in those times when there was a really bad storm coming along, when they could come into Presqu'ile Bay and use it as what they called a harbor of refuge. They would sail to my light, and they would come into the bay and ride out the storm. I don't know how many times I've seen sun comes up the next day, half a dozen ships sailing back out of the bay into the lake, going off to their destination safe and sound. The government even recognized that function, and Presqu'ile Bay was given the official designation as a harbor of refuge. And they got some funding for that, which was great. That was a proud day. Well, over the years, improvements were made all around me. Mr. Nix's wharf over there on Gosport got really busy when Mr. Proctor took it over. And for a time, there were 4 wharfs doing all the loading and unloading of all those schooners that came into the bay and other kinds of ships that came in under my light. They added range lights, which worked with my big light, to make it easier for the ship captains to get into the bay, and it was kind of a difficult entrance. Well, then they dredged a channel into the bay, giving them a more direct access right into the bay, avoiding those shoals out just in front of me. And of course, the Murray Canal was built. And that meant that more ships were coming into the bay. They could go through the canal to avoid those very dangerous channels down the south end of Prince Edward County. But there was some really bad storms. 2 years in particular were the worst. 1892 and 1893. Big hurricanes came up from the Gulf of Mexico right across the Great Lakes. Now, in 1892, it was a bad storm, but it crossed over the west end of Lake Erie, so most of the damage was to the west of us. But in 1893, we took a direct hit. That storm went right over Prince Edward County. Oh, that was a terrible storm. I thought several times I was going to end up out in Lake Ontario. The wind howled for days, and the rain pounded against my sides. Well, eventually the storm went on up to Quebec, but it left hundreds of ships damaged or sunk in Lake Ontario, including Mr. Proctor's 3 schooners. So after these terrible storms, and the decades before that of all the weather, my stylish limestone coat was getting pretty worse for wear. So in the spring of 1894, some men came around and they measured and looked around and they kind of stood there and scratched their heads a bit because they didn't know just what to do. But in the end, they decided to give me another coat, this time of shingles. So a group of men came and there was a lot of sawing and hammering for a number of weeks. Well, you know, I was really worried about my stylish limestone coat. You know, was I going to lose my identity? But when they were finished and they painted the shingles white, I could see that I now had a really beautiful coat. It was shining in the sunlight. So I now looked really good. And people, over time, forgot about the stylish limestone coat. And they started to understand that the shining white shingles were their lighthouse. Well, early in the 1900s, things changed a lot. There was a hotel and a pavilion built down the bay shore a little bit to the west. And music started to come out over the trees. I could hear it. And a lot more people started to come to visit me. They just come and look up at me. Kids would point to the light on top, and the parents would explain how I was there protecting all the sailors and the passengers in the boats that came into the bay. You know, I could really get used to this. And over the years, the music that I heard coming from the pavilion changed a lot over time. And the number of people coming to see me really increased because more and more people were using Presqu'ile for picnicking and cottaging and camping. Well, in 1906, they built an ugly barn right beside me for the foghorn. So I had to kind of share the space for a while. Well, that went away eventually. Also, the technology of my light changed over time. And eventually it became an electronic light. So we didn't need a lighthouse keeper anymore. Well, it got kind of lonely for a while. In the last few years of the 1960s, that music that was coming from the pavilion got really loud. I think they call it rock and roll. Anyway, by that time, it was okay with me. It was only really on Saturday nights. And I also got a lot more visitors on Saturday nights. But they were mostly young couples, and they didn't come to see me. Then in the 1980s, things got really busy because the park built the interpretive center there right beside me. And they used the old lighthouse keeper's cottage as a display space. So after that, a lot more people came, and especially in the warm summer months. And I got a little bit of a sprucing up, and I was really delighted to sit there and pose for those people. Everybody wanted to take a picture. And it was interesting, the visitors around this time were from all over the world. I could hear all sorts of languages. The families down below me were bantering with each other as they threw the flat stones across the waves. So I was really happy to know that a picture of my beautiful white coat was going to be in family photo albums all around the world. I think Mr. Baird would have been really pleased with that. Well, as always, the weather had its effect on my coat, and it started to deteriorate a bit. And after a while, I started to see some very earnest and serious people climbing all over me and measuring and poking and prodding and taking measurements and scribbling in their notebooks. Well, I knew they were looking out for my well-being, but I really wasn't sure just what was going to happen. Now, at some point, the worst of the damage on my shingles was repaired, and that was great. But then, nothing happened again for a while. Finally, I found out that I was going to get a makeover. Now, they determined that my foundation was still very strong, which was good news. But they found out that they needed to replace my shingles. So in the fall of 2017, a crew came. They put up a big tent around me, which was great because it was a warm winter for me with the tent. And they began to do my makeover. So the old shingles were being taken off and the new coat of shingles being put on. You know, I really can't wait for this summer when all these people will come to see me in my nice new shiny coat. People everywhere, and you know, everybody has a camera these days, right? So pictures of my nice new shiny coat are just going to blast all over the world across the internet. So people everywhere will have clear evidence that the people of Brighton and area really care about their lighthouse, and they're willing to put some money out for the makeover. So I want to thank the generous people of Brighton for my makeover. So if anybody asks you how the lighthouse is doing, you can tell them that you heard it directly from the Presqu'ile Point Lighthouse. You can tell them I'm doing just fine, and I should be because I'm getting a makeover. Thank you very much.